They didn't notice the woman in row 9 until the oxygen mask didn't drop. It should have been a forgettable flight, a red-eye pulled taut between coasts with a cabin full of people bargaining sleep from recycled air. In row 9 aisle seat, a woman in a soft gray hoodie and scuffed boots watched the window shade quiver against the faint tremor of skin and metal. All the tells were small, the dry pinch in her sinuses, the way her ears didn't equalize when they should have, the thin prickle at the base of her neck that made the world go a half shade sharper. None of it dramatic, all of it wrong. She pressed her fingertips lightly against the armrest and counted. Not seconds. Pressure. The cabin had drifted. Just a hair. Not enough to wake babies or spill drinks. Enough to warn anyone who had spent years learning that your body is a barometer if you treat it like one. "Can I get you anything before we dim the lights?" The flight attendant's smile was heavy with practice. Her name tag read, Cindy. "Is the pressurization system running normal?" the woman asked, voice low, conversational. "Feels off." Cindy blinked, recalibrating from coffee, tea, juice to technical. "We haven't had any alerts," she said. "We're fine." The woman nodded once, neither challenging nor appeased. She adjusted the angle of the air nozzle above her head by a quarter turn. The stream changed pitch. She listened. It wasn't fear that moved through her. Fear was noisy. This was a steadying, the snap of old training lifting like a visor. Row 9 was the fulcrum where first class gave up its illusions and economy remembered what it was. Across the aisle, a man in a suit performed importance into his phone until airplane mode liberated his audience. An exhausted mother in row 10 cradled a toddler who had lost the argument with sleep and was making peace with gravity. Two college kids in row 8 arranged their limbs like puzzles around backpacks that had more stickers than clothes. Nobody saw the woman in row 9 stand until her knee brushed the aisle. "Seatbelt sign is on," the executive in the suit said without looking up, as if rules were a language he alone spoke correctly. "I see it," the woman said. She scanned the ceiling panel, the rivet line along the sidewall, the tiny curl of condensation where cold met warm. She set her palm flat to the plastic and felt the faintest quiver, like breath caught on a syllable. A seal somewhere wasn't sealing. "Miss?" Cindy tried again. Diplomacy a reflex. "Please remain seated until the captain turns off the sign." "Of course," the woman said, sitting without argument. There was no point in using up authority on the wrong problem. She fixed her eyes on the forward galley curtain, a soft rectangle that told her nothing, and counted her own breaths. In, 4. Out, 4. Under the rhythm she could hear it now, the whispers of metal working, the steady song of engines, and beneath it a minuscule hiss that lived closer to instinct than to ear. A bump, the kind of turbulence pilots warn you about with crisp reassurance. Laughter pinballed off overhead bins, the nervous kind. The plane settled. The woman did not change her count. The intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen," said a voice that had grown up in radio, measured, dry, practiced. "This is Captain Hughes from the flight deck. We're expecting a few light chop areas as we skirt the weather system east of Denver. Nothing to be concerned about. Please keep those seatbelts fastened." Cindy flashed another aisle-check smile that said, "See?" and continued down the row with a trash bag held like a peace treaty. The executive slid back his cuff to verify his watch was still expensive in the dark. Behind the curtain, a cart rattled like a stagehand dragging scenery. Then the plane dipped. Not a fall, a shrug. Enough to wake the man asleep 3 rows back. Enough to make ice clink at row 3. Enough to turn the toddler's soft breathing into a small complaint. The woman in row 9 felt the change in her teeth. She lifted her call button and released it without pressing. Cindy clocked the micro movement anyway. "Yes?" she asked, second time softer. "Can you ask the flight deck to confirm cabin altitude?" the woman asked. "If they're reading anything unusual, they should check Pack B's flow in the outflow valve position. Also, just in case, make sure your manual drop is armed." Cindy's smile thinned. "I'm sure the pilots have it under control," she said. There was no malice in it, just procedure. The executive leaned in, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate expertise in something that wasn't his. "Ma'am," he said, graciousness souring at the edges, If there were a problem, the masks would be down, right? Maybe relax. You're making people nervous. The woman looked at him. Not up, not down. If there were a specific kind of problem, she said evenly, the mask would be down. If there's a different kind, they might not. Please let the attendant do her job. Which is what exactly? He asked. Ferry us across the sky or indulge air sickness conspiracy theories? Sir, Cindy said quickly, crisis managing with a napkin and a hushed tone. We're all good here. The woman in row 9 turned her attention back to the air nozzle. She traced the noise again along the plastic ridge, found the seam where the panel met the frame, felt the cold ghost of skinny air finding a path it shouldn't have. She closed her eyes the way you close a book you've memorized and pictured bleed airlines, regulators, the map of a Boeing cabin sketched over the bones of her hands. When she opened her eyes, the world had narrowed into useful pieces. She unbuckled, stood while the sign glared, and stepped into the aisle toward the galley. Ma'am, Cindy said, apology turning crisp. I really do need you seated. I'm going to the forward lav, the woman said. It's occupied, Cindy said. Please. Then I'll wait by the curtain, the woman replied, already moving. There was nothing threatening in her body, but there was something irrevocable. People made space for it without deciding to. The curtain breathed around the edges. On the other side, she could hear the cadence of checklists. Co-pilot calling, captain confirming. The tempo was wrong, too calm for what her body knew, too clipped for the narrative on the intercom. She touched the curtain softly as if greeting an old habit, and stepped back. It's fine, the executive called from his seat, loud enough to be overheard. She's just looking for attention. A woman across the aisle, gray hair in a braid, hands mapped with years, gave the executive a look that had ended better men. She's looking for something else, the older woman murmured. Let her. The plane jolted again, a fish twitching under net. A glass toppled in row 5 and shattered, a bright punctuation. The lights flickered once, a camera shutter on a bad memory. Somewhere a child began to cry, and somewhere else a man began to pray, and between them 1,000 unremarkable hearts sped up exactly the same way. The intercom clicked again, then stuttered. Cabin crew, a voice began, then cut to a hiss, then returned muffled. To your stations. Possible. Silence. The seatbelt sign dinged like a polite scold. Cindy's eyes flicked toward the bulkhead phone. She crossed to it, lifted the handset, and listened hard without speaking. The woman in row 9 watched the blood drain from Cindy's face a shade, watched the hands of training clamp over the hands of panic. Cindy nodded to no one, then set the phone down gently and stepped back into the aisle, composure pinned on with the same fastener as her name tag. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, voice achieving the impossible balance of calm and urgency. The captain has asked that we all remain seated with seatbelts fastened. If you are standing, please return to your seats immediately. The executive smirked at the woman in row 9. Hear that? Heroic's over. The older woman in the braid reached across the aisle and touched row 9's sleeve once. A benediction you might miss if you didn't need it. If it is what you think, she said very softly, you'll go anyway. The woman in row 9 didn't answer. She was listening to something else, something beyond words. The pitch of the cabin had shifted again, a fraction lower. Her lips moved without sound as she counted. In, 4, out, 4. The number of breaths it takes to remember who you are. The intercom clicked a third time. The voice that came through wasn't Captain Hughes's broadcast tone. It was something closer to a whisper forced large. Row 9, it said, like a person remembering a name they weren't supposed to say. If you're there, if you are who I think you are, this is Hughes. We have a cabin indication we don't trust. Electronics are noisy. If you hear me, the voice tripped, chose honesty over theater. If you hear me, Night Viper, the cockpit is waiting. The sound didn't fill the cabin so much as rewire it. Words gathered, collided, fell quiet. Cindy's eyes widened a breath and then returned to neutral, as if her training had a switch marked, pretend this is normal. The executive opened his mouth and discovered for once that no sentence wanted him. Row 9 stood. There was nothing cinematic about it. No swell of music, no spotlight, Just a woman pushing her hoodie sleeves to her forearms, not to reveal anything, but to move fabric out of the way. She set one hand on the headrest in front of her to steady herself as the plane trembled again, looked down the aisle that had become a corridor of judgment and need, and took a step. "Ma'am," Cindy said instinctively, a protest more habit than conviction. "I know the way," the woman said, and for the first time there was something like command braided into the calm. Not volume, gravity. The executive half rose, the kind of move that announces trouble while pretending to prevent it. "You can't just walk into the—" "Sit down," the woman said without looking at him. He sat. It was not obedience. It was physics. The older woman in the braid leaned back and spoke to no one in particular, perhaps to the air itself. "Night Viper," she repeated softly, like a name you make room for at a table. Cindy lifted the galley curtain. Rules didn't disappear. They made space. The hallway beyond was short, bright, brutally honest. At the end of it, the cockpit door waited behind its bolts and protocols and the long history of reasons doors get invented. The woman in row 9 reached it, placed her palm against the cold panel, not knocking, not demanding, just touching, and the tiny camera above the door looked back at her with its unblinking eye. "Identify," came the speaker's metallic query. Row 9 didn't look up. "Your alt tape is lying to you," she said. "Pack B's fluttering. Outflow valve might be cycling. You'll feel it more than you'll see it, and your mass won't drop if the controller thinks it already saved you." A breath, the sound of someone on the far side deciding what they'd already decided. The light flashed green. The locks clacked back. The door opened. The cockpit door opened just wide enough for a decision to fit through. Cindy stood to one side, eyes steady, shoulders squaring the gap against anyone who might mistake curiosity for entitlement. The executive in the suit had risen again, filming now, his phone held like a badge. "This is insane," he announced to his camera. "A passenger can't—" "Sir," Cindy said, her voice the quiet edge of protocol. "Sit down." He didn't. He stepped into the aisle as if his complaints could reverse airspeed. The older woman with the braid tilted her chin and, for the first time, spoke loud enough for more than one person to hear. "You have already wasted a minute," she told him. "Please do not waste two." The woman from row 9 turned, and for a slice of a second the cabin caught the whole of her face. Calm without vacancy, focus without theater. "You just lost 2 minutes due to prejudice," she said to the executive. "That's long enough to lose a wing." No heat, just arithmetic. Then she slid through the opening before courtesy could close it. Inside the cockpit, the world simplified into gauges, glass, and the human insistence on naming what we don't control. The air smelled faintly of hot plastic and coffee. The soundscape reassembled into meaningful layers. Engine thrum, fan whir, the soft clack of a switch settling into its right life. Captain Hughes sat in the left seat, jaw flexed, eyes in that narrow band of alert where calm and panic shake hands. In the right seat, a younger first officer, Trent, according to the neat strip of Velcro on his chest, half-turned, headset slightly askew, as if his day had not expected a ghost to walk in. "Door," Hughes said. Trent reached and the bolts slid home with a clack that felt like commitment. Row 9 did not move further in without permission. She kept one hand on the frame, absorbing the vibration the way a mechanic lays a palm on an engine. "You called, Mud," she said. Hughes's mouth opened, closed, recalibrated. His broadcast voice, the one that turned weather into bedtime stories, was gone. The voice that remained belonged to a man doing math against time. "We've got sketchy cabin readings," he said. Indications drifted, then stabilized, but not where they should. "Packs are on. Outflow valve shows commanded. No ECAM warning. We're getting a faint electrical noise on the bus." "Altitude tape?" she asked, eyes already taking in the arrangement, not trusting any single instrument until it earned it. "Showing 9.5, Trent said, "but we got ear pop reports and a toddler." He gestured vaguely aft, as if the child's small body could be part of the panel. Row 9 dipped her head once, acknowledging the data source with the same respect as a sensor. She pointed to the overhead. "Pack B," she said. "Cycle it, slow. Don't chase the needle." Trent's hand hovered, then moved. The switch thunked. The sound in the cabin shifted half a key. "Who are you?" Hughes asked, not as a challenge, but as a need. "Put me on the jump seat," she said, because names were less useful than seatbelts. Trent pulled the collapsible seat down with one practiced tug. She folded into it like someone whose body had learned to inhabit small spaces without resenting them. The harness came over her shoulders, clicked. She kept her hands close to herself, away from power unless invited. "I'm not here to fly your airplane," she said to Hughes, eyes on the pressurization panel. "I'm here to help you fly it." Hughes studied her for exactly 1 beat longer than politeness requires. "You've been in one of these before," he said. Not a question. "Long time ago," she said. "Different patch on the sleeve." "Night fee." He stopped himself mid-word. A muscle in his cheek stuttered. "Row 9, he corrected, as if deferring a truth until it could land safely. "We've got weather for the next 100 miles. ATC is cluttered. Our SATCOM's spitting static. Cabins complaining." "Manual drop armed?" she asked. "Armed," Trent said. "No deploy." "Good." She scanned again, this time slower, giving her brain time to line up what her body already knew. She watched the differential pressure trace its delicate line, the outflow valve's percentage, the cabin rate of climb, which was the wrong phrase for a thing that should have been descending slightly, politely, in time with the airplane. "You're high," she said softly, "and lying about it." Hughes's mouth flattened. "That's our suspicion," he said, "but without a fault message." "The fault message is your passenger's sinuses," she said. "Treat the airplane like it's wrong. It will get over it." Trent's fingers danced to the overhead valve control. "Manual?" he asked. 15% close, she said. "Let the differential catch. Don't overshoot." Trent nodded, set the knob. They all listened. The pitch of the air changed by a smidge. You felt more in the sternum than the ear. Hughes's breathing eased by 0.5 millimeter. Nothing dramatic, just a system coaxed back toward its better self. "ATC wants us on a different airway," Trent said, one ear pressed under his headset to the voice in the sky. "Vectors to avoid weather." "Negative," Hughes said. "We'll take a 5-degree right for now. Maintain." He flicked his transmit. "Center, this is Flight 274, experiencing instrument discrepancies, requesting to maintain present course heading 280 for stability, with slight deviation for ride." Instrument discrepancies is how professionals say we don't believe our airplane right now without starting a party. The reply came a beat later, all salt and procedure. "Cleared as requested. Report ride." Trent glanced at row 9, a question unasked. "Paper checklist," she said. "Not the tablet. Old pressurization abnormal. Let's not pretend the airplane is younger than it is." Trent reached under the yoke, pulled a dog-eared booklet free, a fossil of comfort in a glass cockpit. He flipped pages, fingers sure. "Here," he said, tapping the line. Hughes read, lips moving, muscle memory syncing with words. Behind them, the door vibrated with a knock that meant people. Cindy's voice slid through the intercom, composed, tilted toward urgency. "Captain, we have a passenger trying to, insist he's recording for legal evidence. He's upsetting row 10. Also, the mother requests assurance for her child. The little one is crying." Hughes closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you, Cindy," he said. "Tell them we've engaged procedures and that cries are healthy. Keep them seated." Row 9 reached for the intercom switch but stopped her hand an inch short. "Permission to speak cabin?" she asked. Hughes's eyes flicked to her hand, then to her face. He hesitated exactly as long as a career demands. "Granted," he said. She pressed the button. "Hi," she said into the system, voice coming through overhead speakers like an old song. "This is row 9. You don't need my name. You need my promise. We're adjusting the cabin slowly, so your ears may feel crowded for a minute. That's okay. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. If you need to yawn, do it. If you need to cry, do it. It helps. Everything you feel is data. We're reading it. Thank you for sitting still while we get this right." Silence, then a wave of almost laughter. The relieved kind, from somewhere near the back. The toddler's cry softened. The older woman in the braid let out a breath so deliberate it was almost audible through the panel. Hughes watched row 9 speak, and something old slipped into his eyes, unguarded. Your patter's better than mine, he said. Not patter, she said, releasing the switch. Instruction? Thunder grumbled far ahead, a dull warning. On the weather display, a smear of green and yellow painted the world. Trent tweaked the tilt on the radar, peering under the anvil for a cleaner path. We could ask for higher, he offered. Row 9 shook her head. Not while your cabin's playing games. Keep her steady. Adjust what you can control before you chase what you can't. Hughes's right hand rested on the yoke, like a reminder instead of a need. He glanced down at her boots, scuffed and purposeful, then at the way her shoulders sat, relaxed but stacked. You flew, he said quietly. Not airline. Once, she allowed. Out of. He stopped himself again, as if names were flares that might draw attention he didn't want. Lots of places, she said. Captain, your electrics are whispering. That static on SATCOM could be a leaky shield. Consider isolating non-essentials on bus 2 for a minute. See if the noise drops. Hughes's brows drew together, then lifted. Trent, he said. Trent's fingers moved, switches flipped. The hiss in his ear eased like a headache stepping back. He exhaled a small, incredulous laugh. How did you? She listens, Hughes said, not taking his eyes off the panel. Row 9 took in the slow drift of the cabin altitude back toward honesty, the valve percentages, the rate easing. She leaned forward as far as the harness allowed and tapped the edge of the old checklist booklet. Write down the time we started manual, she said, and the alt trend. If we need to brief maintenance later, we'll have a story that isn't just felt weird, Trent scribbled. The pen's scratch sounded like faith. From the cabin side of the door came a muffled argument in a familiar timbre. The executive again, logic inflated with fear. Rights, regulations, lawsuits. Cindy's reply was a calmer metronome. Sit, breathe, wait. The older woman's voice braided through, let the pilot work, and the argument frayed. Through his side window, Hughes watched a seam of lightning stitch the horizon and tear it back apart. We'll skirt north, he decided. Give the cells their tantrum south of us. Set and brief, Trent said. His voice had changed since she'd walked in. Less trying to prove something, more doing it. New course 285, speed 76 Mach, holding altitude until cabin catches up. Row 9 relaxed back into the harness, just enough that the webbing noticed. Her hands stayed empty. She had learned the difference between control and the need to touch it. Hughes adjusted a dial, then quietly, as if he were letting a secret test its legs. If you're who I think you are, I never thought I'd... He stopped, changed tense. I'm glad you're here. Row 9 didn't look at him. We're all here, she said. Let's keep it that way. They rode the next 5 minutes like a word held on the tongue, carefully, meaningfully. The cabin's pitch settled into something respectable. The differential behaved. The baby's cries thinned into hiccups. In row 9's old seat, the older woman closed her eyes and touched the armrest, as if in benediction for the person who'd left it. Trent checked the paper against the glass and nodded once. Cabin rate steady, he reported. Altitude trending correct. Outflow at 18%. Packs A and B normal. Good, Hughes said. Let's keep the speed civil and the turns polite. Row 9 let herself breathe all the way down into the ribs. The airplane had stopped lying. For now. She allowed the smallest piece of attention to swivel from instruments to people. Tell Cindy to ask for reports from rows 8 through 12, she said. Ear pressure, headaches, any nausea. And have her ignore the man with the camera unless he stands up. Hughes keyed the intercom. Cindy, you heard the lady. Copy that, came the reply. She sounded relieved to have been told what she'd already been doing. Lightning blued the clouds again. Thunder rolled to a patient distance. The radar painted less insistently to the north. Trent wrote a new time down, underlining it. Hughes looked at row 9's profile. The hoodie, the jaw, the scar at the hairline you don't get from falling asleep on a book. A muscle under his eye flicked. Call sign? He asked, almost formal, almost like saying grace. Her mouth considered for a heartbeat, then softly without ceremony, as if returning a library book that had spent too long in her bag, Night Viper 9. Hughes's lips parted around something that might have been a prayer or a swear or a thank you that couldn't decide which language to use. God help me, he said. I thought they buried you. Not yet, she said. Let's earn the runway before we resurrect anything. Trent didn't look up from the instruments. He just smiled with his eyes, the kind of smile that knows an old story has walked into the room and sat down where it belonged. Okay, Hughes said, breath steadying into a new rhythm that belonged to a different kind of flight. Night Viper, you have the jump seat. Talk me through the next 5 minutes. Row 9 nodded. Start with the truth, she said. Your airplane thinks the sky is friendlier than it is. Let's introduce them properly. She leaned forward, the checklist open, the world narrowing not into fear, but into exactly what needed doing. Hughes's hands stayed on the yoke, but the airplane was listening to her now. Row 9, Night Viper, a name too large to fit in a seat row. Let the jump seat harness keep her from forgetting where she sat. She didn't need to touch the controls to own the moment. Authority didn't live in contact. It lived in clarity. Checklist says, stop the pressurization lie, she said, eyes taking in the panel the way a chess player takes in a board. We've done that. Next, electrics. Your SATCOM hiss is a tell, a ground you don't want humming. Keep non-essentials off bus 2. If the cabin drifts again, we go manual on outflow sooner. We don't wait for permission. Trent nodded, already writing. Hughes glanced across the glass. Engine gauges steady, EEC is clean, radar tilt adjusted so the storm looked like weather, not apocalypse. The alt tape sat there with the smugness of a liar who hasn't been confronted yet. Your altitude, Night Viper said, is misreporting. You feel that, Captain? In my teeth, Hughes said. If we trust the tape, we go high for a smoother ride and punch our ears through paper. If we don't, we keep her here and make the air honest. We keep her here, she said. We don't buy smooth with oxygen. Lightning stitched a distant seam. The airplane rode a small rib of turbulence and then found the lull on the backside. Behind the door, the cabin murmured. The way people do when they agree to the unspectacular discipline of sitting down. The radio crackled as if the storm liked the taste of their frequency. Flight 274 Center, be advised. Cells building east of your track. Recommend flight level 380 for ride. Hughes thumbed the push to talk. Center 274 unable for the moment due to instrument discretion. Will hold 340 and report ride. A half beat, then clipped. 274 maintain 340. Be advised company message awaits. Trent's tablet flashed the message icon. He opened it, read, winced. Company wants strict adherence to SOP, prohibits non-crew in flight deck. He summarized, requests immediate compliance. Hughes didn't look back at the jump seat. He didn't need to. He'd flown long enough to know when words were trying to fix the wrong thing. Company can have my report, he said flat. He flicked a switch to isolate the ACAR's chime. We'll keep flying the airplane. Trent looked at Night Viper. His face held a question without making it her burden. Do I back you? She met his eyes once, and he nodded a shade. Decision made. Captain, he said, voice steady. For the record, I concur with Jump Seat Advisor's recommendations. My authorization, my signature. We have a cabin abnormal and untrustworthy indications. She stays. Hughes's jaw softened a fraction. Noted, he said. Row 9, you have the ear. I have the aircraft. Good, she said. Next, you're getting a subtle static through the audio panel. That's bleed from the right alternator bus. Trent, isolate right side galley load. It's a small shave. Might drop noise a dB. Trent moved. The hiss stepped back as if embarrassed to be noticed. Let's pretend, she said. Your smart systems take a nap at the same time as the weather grows teeth. What do you trust? Attitude, raw data. The horizon that isn't trying to sell me anything, Hughes said. Exactly, she said. Uncouple the autopilot a second. Feel the trim. If she's been compensating for a pressurization lie, it may have built a bias. Hughes glanced at her, then clicked off the AP. The yoke transmitted the airplane's truth down both his forearms, a whisper of nose-up insistence that hadn't earned its keep. He trimmed her out, 1, 2, until she sat in the air the way a boat sits on good water. Behind them, Cindy checked in. Captain, reports from rows 8 to 12. Ear pressure easing, one headache subsiding. Toddler says it popped. And row nine's old seat says to tell you she's praying for the clouds to mind their manners. Hughes smiled despite himself. Tell row nine's old seat the clouds have been warned. A new sound crawled into the cockpit. The faint brawling of frequencies that meant the VHF was picking up ground chatter, riding ionized air. Through it, a voice pushed itself large, misusing authority like volume. Flight 274. This is company. Remove any unauthorized personnel from the cockpit immediately. This is not a request. Trent's eyes ticked toward the speaker, then to Hughes. If the storm had a sense of humor, it would have laughed then. Authority had chosen a very poor time to announce itself. Night Viper didn't wait for the captain to waste energy on a reply. She leaned toward the audio panel and flipped the toggle off Bus 2's input for AUX comm, severing the shout with the neatness of a scissors through thread. We'll answer the ground when we're on it, she said. Right now we answer gravity. A beat. Then Hughes barked a laugh. Short. Grateful. Copy that, he said. The alt tape flickered a small, mean twitch. For the first time, Iekes flirted with a message it couldn't decide to marry. Cabin alt warn. Then quiet, like a cough smothered in a sleeve. There, Night Viper said. Your controller is out of tune. Trent, nudge manual a hair. 12%. Hold. Trent eased the knob. The rate needle behaved, settling into a patient descent. The warning flirt didn't return. The air in the cockpit felt less like a lie. ATC suggests higher again, Trent reported. Ride reports good at 3.8. ATC can suggest, Hughes said. We'll politely decline. The weather radome painted a bright tooth north-northeast. She adjusted tilt again with a nod, letting Hughes see the contour she wanted him to see. The gap that wasn't obvious until you'd been embarrassed by clouds in combat. There, she said. Aim the nose to rake the backside of that cell. You'll get scrape, not bite. Hughes set the heading bug. The jet obeyed with the dignity of something heavy being deft. He glanced back at her then, the question he'd put off since she stepped through the door, knocking at his ribs. You really Night Viper? He asked, quiet enough to be a truce. Was, she said. They told us Oregon ate you, Trent blurted, then looked down, ashamed of the picture inside his sentence. Media eats a lot of people it doesn't know how to hold, she said. We'll discuss ghost when we're on dirt. Fair, Hughes said. How did you? He gestured, meaning the pressurization fix, the electric shave, the way she'd spoken to an airplane as if it were a dog learning not to lunge. Same way you did your first single-engine ILS with ice on the wipers, she said. You pay attention to the thing that's not screaming, and you ask it why. The RA ticked a polite number. They were solidly inside the flight levels, clouds now noble instead of feral. The kind of ride that made even anxious hearts take coffee again. The cabin breathed with them. The radio clicked. The right voice this time, calm and clipped. 274, say ride. Light occasional, Hughes answered. Cabin anomaly trending normal. Will advise. Roger, traffic 12 o'clock opposite direction, 370. 20 miles. Looking, Trent said. He adjusted the TCAS range. A diamond marched past their screen like a polite stranger on a sidewalk. Night Viper let herself sit half an inch deeper into the seat back. The harness's web loosened almost imperceptibly. When you hit the smoother air, she said, don't celebrate. Systems sometimes sell you a victory lap. Keep the manual valve where we set it until the differential proves its trust for 10 straight minutes. 10 minutes, Trent repeated, writing it down like a covenant. A soft tone, but not their tone. From the cabin, someone's phone insisting on life where it shouldn't. Cindy's voice crackled. Captain, we've confiscated 3 devices recording near the forward galley. Hughes exhaled. Copy, he said. Log it. Thank you. Night Viper pictured the cabin, the executive thwarted, the child hiccuping into sleep. The older woman's hands folded the way some people fold maps after a long road has finally agreed to be the right one. She didn't give those images permission to make her soft. Softness was for after. Trent, she said, read me raw altitude off the standby. Trent checked. Reads 3-4 on the nose. She nodded. And cabin altitude? 7.7 and descending. Good, let's get you out of the box. She tapped the radar. When we clear this line, request a 5-mile offset right of course for ride. The airway's crowded. It'll keep us out of the wake soup. Trent keyed the mic. Center gave them the offset like a favor, reluctantly granted. The A cars chimed again, persistent as a toothache. Trent glanced down, then at Hughes. Do I? Let it sing, Hughes said. We're busy. Night Viper allowed herself one glance at his hands. They'd stopped telegraphing the effort. His shoulders had dropped. His breath sounded less like duty and more like habit. Trent's pen had stopped its frantic scratch and found a pace you could pass on to someone else later, without shame. You've got it, she said to Hughes. I'll shut up unless you ask. Keep talking, he said. Your silence is expensive. Something eased in her face without breaking the lines. Then here's the next 5, she said. We treat every system as guilty until it earns innocence. We brief Cindy to keep people seated. We give the cabin their physics in plain words. We plan our descent with manual valve in mind, so we don't build a pressure trap that squeezes their brains at 10,000. We do not let ATC rearrange us for their convenience. We are polite, not obedient. Hughes's mouth twitched. You sure you didn't fly airlines? I flew people, she said. Aluminum's just the container. The storm slid behind them, a gray ideascape receding in the windows. The radar softened into a green wash and then into simple weather, the kind that belonged on postcards. Cabin altitude ticked downward like a patient clock. The interphone lit. Cindy again, voice lower, almost intimate now that the dragon had stopped breathing down her neck. Captain? The little boy's asleep. The man with the camera moved back to row 20 after row 9's old seat told him she knew his mother. Hughes smiled openly. Copy, he said. Please convey thanks to row 9's old seat. Already did, Cindy said. And Captain? Whatever you're doing, it's working. Hughes looked at Night Viper. She's doing it, he said. We are, Night Viper corrected. Keep it plural. It's how people make it to Juice and Jetways. The A cars chimed a third time. Persistent, small, unimportant in a way that felt like victory. Trent killed its volume with the affection you give a pet that will never learn. Cabin differential at 8.0, he announced. Steady and true. Hughes set his jaw around the word that had been waiting. Thank you, he said. To her, to the room, to the version of himself that had trusted the thing that didn't wear a uniform. Night Viper, he added, and this time the name didn't startle the air. It blessed it. Stay with us through descent? I'll stay until the wheels argue with the runway, she said. Trent laughed. I like the way you measure things. She permitted herself a small smile, the kind you give to a day that has finally accepted your terms. It's a good runway, she said. Let's not insult it by arriving messy. The airplane hummed, a content sound. The storm behind them now smoldered without malice. Somewhere in the cabin, the executive rehearsed a story he wouldn't get to tell. Somewhere else, an older woman closed her eyes and let the name Night Viper fit properly into the part of memory that holds saints and sailors. Up front, 3 people did the next right thing, and then the next, and then the one after that. None of it was dramatic. All of it was the difference between headlines and a homecoming. The storm outside had moved from tantrum to doctrine. Inside the cabin, the weather had only just begun. With the cockpit sealed and the airplane finally agreeing with itself, the cabin learned to sit with its thoughts. That, it turned out, was harder than turbulence. When the room stops shaking, you discover the people in it. Row 20 had become a small parliament chaired by the loudest pocket square. The executive, no longer in first-class proximity, but dangerous with a front-facing camera, held his phone at an angle that made everything look like a confession. We will have this on record, he told anyone who looked. I will be filing with the FAA. The airline allowed an unvetted passenger into the cockpit. She could be... He needed a noun that would behave and found only the wrong ones. A risk. Sir, Cindy said, standing with her feet set the way dance teachers recommend. The captain invited a qualified advisor to assist with a system's irregularity. Please keep your seatbelt fastened. Qualified how? By hoodie? His laugh bounced off bin doors. Most people didn't answer him directly. They answered him with posture, turning away, shrinking the space where his volume could land. But rumors metabolize in silence. A murmur threaded the rows. Court-martial, black ops, fake, stunt, hero, liability. Two teenagers engineered a myth between them in whispers, their eyes bright with borrowed danger. A woman in a navy suit typed furiously, emailing legal, or a sister, or a memory. The older woman with the braid, row nine's old seat, became a point of gravity. People kept finding reasons to address her. Did she think it would be okay? Had she seen such a thing before? Was the crying child's ear supposed to hurt like this? She offered answers without pretending to be an oracle. Yes, she said to the pain. Chew. To the disbelief, there are pilots and there are people who remember they used to be. To an accusation cloaked as a question, who does she think she is? She said, someone who stood up when sitting down was wrong. At row 10, the mother rocked gently, cheek to the small skull under her chin. The child had surrendered to sleep, mouth open, breath a warm proof of life. The toy airplane, die-cast chipped at the wing, slid off a small hand and clinked into the aisle. It skittered forward with the plane's tiny movements until it paused near row 9, as if remembering where it had learned its name. Cindy stooped to retrieve it, but the older woman's hand got there first. She cradled the model for a second, thumb tracing the decal no one else would notice, then placed it carefully on the armrest. Hold on to that, she told the mother. He'll want to ask it questions when he wakes. About what? The mother whispered. About why the sky needed a person, she said. 2 rows back, a man with a veteran's haircut and a lifer's quiet watched the aisle as if it were a runway. He'd been silent through the turbulence, counting like someone for whom breath had once been issued as gear. Now he leaned toward Cindy when she passed. Tell your captain, he said in a voice that belonged outside. He did right. I will, she said, and knew she wouldn't need to. Right already had a way of telling itself. The executive's rebuttal broadcast continued. You are all sheeple, he declared to a camera that had learned better adjectives from worse men. You don't know who she is. You don't either, the navy-suited woman replied without looking up from her screen. That's the point. Exactly, he said triumphantly, mistaking agreement for concession. She could be anybody. Anybody saved you, row 9's old seat murmured. Imagine that. Cindy made her way forward to the galley phone. She pressed the switch to flight deck and waited for the click that meant the other world had heard her. Cabin check complete, she said. Reports improved. 1 headache, 1 complaint. And, Captain, for what it's worth, most people have decided breathing is more important than inventing adjectives. Hughes's voice returned with a tone you could set a glass on. Copy. Convey thanks. Begin preparing the cabin early for a controlled descent. We'll do it polite. Polite meant more announcements in plain speech and less theater. It meant reminding people to swallow, to yawn, to trust the sound of their own bodies more than the rumors that tried to live in their heads. Cindy did it without flourish, as if reading directions for assembling a crib, and the room responded with that quiet, you get at churches and in rooms where people have decided to be brave in a way they never practiced. The older woman in the braid took off her sweater and folded it into a rectangle to place behind the mother's elbow, so she could sleep crooked without paying for it tomorrow. The veteran checked the emergency card as if to refresh muscle memory, then put it back exactly square. The teenagers edited their myth. Their heroine had been erased for a reason 5 minutes ago. Now she had been erased because of reasons, which is different and better and closer to real. All the while, the executive narrated his own trial, jury, and verdict into a lens that didn't love him back. Every so often, he caught the older woman's eye and looked away. He recognized rank when he saw it. He just didn't know its insignia. Up front, rank was irrelevant. Work was sovereign. Night Viper watched the cabin altitude behave like contrition on a graph. She let the sound of instants stack into a music only pilots keep time to. Tone, click, whisper, breath. The radar had softened to weather, not warning. The SATCOM hiss had been demoted to nuisance. Next concern, she said, tapping a knuckle lightly against the pressurization panel, is descent. You do this wrong and you'll squeeze their heads like jars. You do it right and they'll call it uneventful, which is the medal we're after. Trent nodded. He'd been a student long enough to understand the value of unremarkable outcomes. Profile? Shallow step, she said. Tell Center we're initiating a planned cabin-friendly descent. Keep the valve where we like it until 10,000. Then we'll talk about giving the controller its toy back. We'll ignore any urge to please the fuel gods unless the numbers get religious. Hughes leaned into the mic. Center 274, request pilot's discretion descent in 10 miles for cabin considerations. 274, pilot's discretion approved, the frequency replied, skeptical but compliant. Maintain reporting. We'll advise, Hughes said. A pause lived in the cockpit, companionable. Trent adjusted. The nose did what noses do when asked the right way, and the airplane began the long, civilized glide toward an agreement with Earth. Hughes glanced back. Company will have me in a room tomorrow, he said. They can have their room, Night Viper said. You kept yours. He smiled, only a little, because he would need his face later. They still say Oregon, he murmured, not a question now, more like touching a bruise that had stopped blooming. She kept her eyes on the needle that mattered. They say a lot of places, she said. The map is generous with ghosts. Trent pretended to study the overhead. You don't have to answer this, he offered, which is how you earn answers. Was it as bad as the stories? She let the harness hold the weight of the memory instead of her muscles. She saw it the way you see lightning after it's over. A trace on the inside of the eyelid. Mountains with the lights turned off. A radio that forgot what voices were for. A checklist where the ink ran because she hadn't let the pen dry. The smell when aluminum remembers it used to be ore. It was work, she said finally. And then it was more work. And then it was silence. Hughes didn't push the word silence. He'd flown long enough to know its articles. Silence you choose, silence you are given, silence you earn. Copy, he said, meaning something older than radio. Back in the cabin, the weather moved on from rumor to alignment. The mother slept with her mouth open. The toy airplane sat guard. The veteran in row 14 leaned across the aisle as if swapping base stories at a bar, but said nothing that needed classification. The teenagers decided to stop narrating and start listening. The navy-suited woman finished her email. Incident contained. Human factor saved us, and set her phone face down, which is how you say amen in offices with no windows. The executive, deprived of attention long enough for his certainty to deflate, switched tactics. What's her name? He asked Cindy, attempting curiosity. Row 9, she said. I mean her real row. 9, she repeated, and moved on because service is also strategy. Ma'am? The voice was small and careful. The child was awake, fingers seeking the metal plane. Are we flying still? We are, the older woman with the braids said, and someone is making sure we do it kindly. What's her name, he asked, because children still think names are spells. She has two, the older woman said. One you'll forget and one you won't. What's the one I won't? Night Viper, she said softly, like a story you tell a child who loves dragons because he knows they can be steered. He tested the syllables, smiling at the V that felt like a race car. Night Viper. The executive rolled his eyes. Mythology. Memory, the veteran corrected. Different department. At 30,000, the cabin taught itself to yawn on command. Cindy demonstrated dramatically, a silent opera that made row 22 laugh, and laughter made the cabin lighter. Science no one writes papers about because it refuses to hold still in a lab. Hughes briefed dissent like a man who had learned to talk to both instruments and people. We'll take her down as if she were full of glass, he said. Trent, set green dot, look ahead on. We'll ride the long escalator. Trent set, called, confirmed. Night Viper watched the numbers line up. Patient, obedient to physics that don't care about reputation. She imagined the ground not as rescue, but as a partner waiting to be kept. Any tricks left? Hughes asked. Just one, she said. You've got an old mode in here nobody uses anymore. The echo sweep on terrain if you kick it out of its screensaver. It paints better at this angle. It'll help you thread the last bumps if the radar throws a fit. Hughes's head tilted. They took that out 3 software loads ago. They hid it, she said. They never take anything out when a lawyer might want it back. Look under util. Trent's finger danced. A forgotten page blinked to life, sheepish and helpful. He grinned despite himself. Well, I'll be, he said. The sweep whispered a more generous contour of the air they planned to enter. That's elegant. Old things remember, she said. We owe them use. Down the aisle, the executive finally pocketed his phone when the veteran asked him, softly but with an entire battalion behind it, to stop filming the sleeping child. He did not apologize. He did later ask Cindy if there were forms to request compensation for emotional distress. Behind the safety card, she said, without looking. He checked. There wasn't. He stared at a diagram of exits until it taught him something. The descent profile drew itself like a taut line on a page. The cabin exhaled a collective breath that sounded like a tide leaving a beach. Shoes slid forward a half-inch. Plastic cups sighed. Somewhere, row 9's old seat closed her eyes and put one palm on the armrest, where a woman had sat just before remembering she could be more than a passenger. Altimeter set, Trent said. Field in sight? Hughes asked. Not yet, Trent said. But I believe in it. Night Viper let herself look once out the side window, where the world had texture again instead of theory. A grid of lights like quiet mathematics. A river deciding what kind of silver to be. Beyond, the dark that belongs to things that are not planes and not people, and still deserve respect. Let's make a promise, she said. No applause. Hughes chuckled. That's up to the cabin. Then let's make it up to the airplane, she said. She's done enough tonight. Fair point, he said and trimmed. The yoke settled into his hands as naturally as a pen in a poet's grip. Behind the door, the child held the toy plane up and aimed it at the ceiling. Night Viper, he whispered, and the older woman smiled as if a new saint had just been assigned a job. Outside, the runway waited without expectation, long and literal. Inside, a room full of people adjusted their stories by a few degrees toward true. The first glimpse of coastline came as a rumor in the haze, an uneven strip of gray, neither cloud nor ground, that made the air ahead feel denser. Inside the cockpit, there was no applause, no declaration of victory, just the low, concentrated silence of three people who understood that flying was never over until metal met Earth and decided to stay there. Field should be in 10, Trent reported, adjusting the tilt on the radar as if coaxing truth out of static. Cabin differential? Night Viper asked, eyes never leaving the instruments. 6.5, stable, he said. Descent smooth. Then the hard part's done, Hughes murmured. Now we convince gravity to cooperate. Behind them, Cindy moved quietly through a cabin that no longer felt like a crowd of strangers. The executive had gone quiet. Whether by shame, exhaustion, or simple recalibration, no one could tell. The older woman in row 9's old seat held the sleeping child's hand, humming something tuneless and steady. Every few minutes, someone would look toward the closed cockpit door as if expecting light to leak out. Cindy picked up the galley phone. Captain, she said, most passengers are calm. One man asked if he can apologize to the woman in the hoodie when we land. Hughes glanced at Night Viper. Tell him she doesn't collect those. Cindy smiled. Copy that. Approach wants you at 210 in 5 minutes, Trent said. Runway assigned, 26 left. Hughes confirmed. Set speed 250, flaps 1 at 10. The airplane obeyed, the kind of obedience that only comes from machines treated with respect. Night Viper's gaze lingered on the faint shimmer at the edge of the horizon, fog smeared thin by the morning wind. She could almost taste salt. Looks familiar, she said. Hughes nodded. Port Larson. We've been diverting here for decades. Runway's long enough to forgive most mistakes. Then let's not test its generosity, she replied. She turned to Trent. Before you brief final, I want you to do one thing. Pull the CVR breaker. Trent blinked. The cockpit voice recorder? Yes. Ma'am, that's... Protocol says recorders remain powered until shutdown. Hughes interjected, testing her. Protocol also says we preserve data from active emergencies, she countered. This one's over. But if you let that tape roll, you're going to hand your company a story they'll distort. Save yourself the hearing. For a long moment, the only sound was the steady drone of engines. Then Hughes nodded once, curt and deliberate. Trent, he said. Click. The small light went dark. Down below, the weather broke open like a secret. Thin sunlight slipped through ragged clouds, painting the wings in fractured gold. The airport's long black ribbon appeared at the edge of the sea. It looked absurdly small. Speed 180, flaps 5, Hughes said. Trent moved the lever. Speed checked. Night Viper studied the pressure gauge. Perfect curve, no deceit. Cabin differential 4, she said softly. Passengers will feel it in their ears, but not their bones. That's how you know you did it right. Hughes chuckled under his breath. You should be teaching cadets. I tried, she said. They wanted PowerPoint. I wanted listening. He almost laughed again, but the runway grew larger, and laughter had to wait. Gear down, he ordered. Flaps 15. The hum of hydraulics filled the cockpit, a physical exhale. 3 green, Trent confirmed. No flags. Landing checklist complete, Night Viper said. Runway in sight, Hughes added. We'll take manual at 1,000. The airplane sank through the final layer of haze and the world sharpened into things with names. Water, sand, concrete, home. In the cabin, Cindy's voice came over the PA, soft as cloth. Ladies and gentlemen, we're making our final approach. Please remain seated and keep your belts fastened. We'll be on the ground soon. The mother in row 10 kissed her son's forehead. The older woman straightened her braid and closed her eyes. The executive slipped his phone into his bag and, for the first time, whispered something that sounded like gratitude. The toy airplane was still clutched in a small hand. It tilted slightly as the real one tilted, as if the boy already knew how imitation becomes belief. 500, Trent called. Stable, Hughes replied. His hands rested light on the yoke, fingertips reading the air. Night Viper leaned closer, eyes on the rate tape. Wind's shifting. You've got a 3-knot tail. She'll float if you let her. Copy, he trimmed. The descent line steadied. 300. Approach path good. 200. Visual. 100. The wheels touched with the quiet thud of a secret being kept. Spoilers deployed. Reversers roared for half a heartbeat, then sighed back to idle. The airplane slowed, steady and obedient. Hughes exhaled through his teeth. Welcome to Port Larson, Trent grinned. That was a textbook. Night Viper shook her head. No, textbooks don't smell like rubber. Taxiing in was a slow reintroduction to the ordinary. Ground crew in neon vests stared as if they were watching the last scene of a film no one had advertised. Hughes guided the aircraft toward a stand ringed by emergency vehicles that didn't need to be there anymore. Cindy, you can tell them we're safe, he said over the intercom. Already did, Captain, she replied, voice trembling with something too complex for relief alone. He looked back at Night Viper. They'll want to debrief you. I'll pass, she said. They'll insist. Then they'll learn disappointment builds character. The engines wound down. The world stopped moving. For the first time in hours, gravity felt heavier than duty. Hughes turned in his seat. You saved my people, he said simply. You flew your airplane, she corrected. I just reminded it who's boss. He smiled, then extended a hand. Night Viper. She looked at it for a beat, then took it. Captain. Trent unbuckled and stood, eyes full of the awe only new pilots still manage. Ma'am, he said, whatever Oregon was, thank you for not staying there. She gave him half a smile. The mountains keep their secrets. We just borrow them. Outside the cockpit, the door opened to a new chorus of sound. Air, footsteps, the subdued clatter of phones being turned back on. Cindy waited, eyes bright. They're waiting for you, she said. Night Viper shook her head. They're waiting for a story. Tell them to make one up. She slipped past her, down the aisle that had once been chaos. Passengers straightened, a ripple of hush following her. The child pointed. That's her, he whispered. Cindy smiled. Yes, that's her. Night Viper paused by row 9's old seat. The older woman rose without surprise. You'll vanish again, she said quietly. Only from the news, Night Viper replied. The woman pressed something into her hand, a small folded napkin. In case you ever need a landing strip that fits in a pocket. Night Viper tucked it into her sleeve. You'd be amazed how often I do. She kept walking. At the rear, the door was open to the sun, a rare, forgiving light. The air smelled like jet fuel, an ocean. She didn't look back. In the cockpit, Hughes and Trent sat in the strange calm that follows catastrophe. Ground control chattered in the headset about tow trucks and paperwork. Hughes ignored them. Think she'll give a statement? Trent asked. She already did, Hughes said. Every time she touched a switch. He reached for the CVR breaker, thought better of it, and left it dark. Outside, Night Viper walked across the tarmac, hair lifting in the salt wind. Hoodie catching the morning light like wings folded just enough to hide. A maintenance crewman lifted his phone to snap a photo, but something about her stride made him lower it again. Some people you record, others you remember. By the time the paramedics reached the stairs, she was gone. They tried to fold the day into paperwork before the story could breathe. Port Larson's terminal had been turned into a hallway of apologetic signage and bottled water. A cluster of airline reps in Navy suits formed a polite wall between the passengers and the cameras that had materialized from nowhere, conjured by a text to a cousin of a cousin. Security cordoned a path with nylon belts that trembled like nervous wrists. The public address system cleared its throat every 6 minutes and said nothing useful. Captain Hughes and Trent were escorted to a small conference room with glass walls and a view of the runway. The view was a mistake. It kept insisting there were larger horizons than policy. A woman with a badge that said Corporate Communications set down a tray of styrofoam coffee and a stack of release forms. Before we proceed, she said brightly, we'd like to align on messaging. Hughes looked at the forms as if they were a strange species that had learned to migrate indoors. Our message is that we landed, he said. Exactly, she replied, and we're so proud of our team. We'll emphasize training, standard procedures, our commitment to— Training didn't fix the valve, Trent said before he could stop himself. The woman's smile thinned. We can discuss technical details with maintenance, she said. For the public, we'll focus on calm, and please avoid any mention of a passenger in the flight deck. Hughes's jaw rolled. She had a name, he said. We're not naming her, Com said quickly, for her privacy and ours. Trent toggled his pen in his fingers. How do you propose we answer the question without mentioning the answer? By not getting the question, she said. We'll handle the press. Hughes stared through the glass at the long ribbon of runway that had been generous enough to forgive them. You won't. On the other side of the terminal, Cindy stood between a clump of microphones and the older woman with the braid, who had the grave composure of someone who refused to be hurried by news cycles. The executive hovered nearby with his phone. No live stream now, just an open notes app and a compulsion. A reporter with a voice like a hand on your shoulder asked, Can you confirm that a passenger entered the cockpit? Cindy's smile did not budge. A qualified advisor assisted the flight crew during a systems irregularity, she said. I can confirm the crew maintained control at all times. Was the advisor's name? Row 9, the older woman said softly, and the microphone swung toward her as if magnetized. That's what the airplane called her. Is she a pilot? Another voice demanded, urgent, impatient. She's a person, the older woman replied. That was enough. The executive finally found his moment. This airline will hear from my legal team, he declared as if invoking a deity. Allowing a stranger into the cockpit, criminally irresponsible. A man with a veteran's haircut stepped forward. The criminal thing, he said, would have been letting you talk longer. Laughter, small, grateful, sharper than it should have been, rippled across the microphones. The executive flushed, tried to rally, and tweeted instead. Downstairs, the baggage carousel turned everyone's life into the same black belt of waiting. The mother from row 10 sat on her suitcase and held her boy's small hand while he studied the shape of the planes taxiing outside. That one is like ours, he said, pointing to the simplest possible miracle, a thing that had flown and then stopped. At Gate 12, a cell phone video began its long migration on the internet. The clip showed nothing of the cockpit because nothing in the cabin could. It showed instead the moments around it, the hush when the intercom carried a stranger's promise, the way the older woman's hand found the armrest, the second when an executive opened his mouth and the room decided he was wrong without committee. Text overlaid itself in white. She said, breathe. We did. Someone added a track of piano that did not belong and somehow didn't ruin it. By late afternoon, the airline released a statement crafted in the emergency grammar of lawyers. During an in-flight irregularity, our crew exercised their discretion to ensure the safety of all customers. We do not permit non-crew members in the flight deck. The sentence tried to hold two things that didn't like each other. The internet noticed the wobble and squeezed its fingers in the gap. Hughes read the statement on a borrowed phone. "They'll let it carry water until the leak stops," he said. Trent rubbed his face with both hands. He'd aged a week and a day. "They'll throw me in a room," he said. "They'll throw me in a bigger one," Hughes said. "Then they'll put us both on a flight at dawn." He put the phone down, looked at the door that Night Viper had used to leave. "Assuming they can find her." They could not. She was already past the perimeter, past the parking lot where the smell of jet fuel softened into exhaust, past the chain-link fence and the tired bushes that tried to make airports look like parks. A rideshare driver named Carol picked her up because the app told her to, and because sometimes the face that opens your back door carries a quiet dignity you decide not to chat at. "You flying in or out?" Carol asked once they'd merged into a road that believed in straight lines. "Out," Night Viper said, which was also true. "You look like you saved somebody," Carol said. "Everybody did their job," Night Viper replied. "Well," Carol said, adjusting the radio to an oldies station that played songs that remember better than people do, "glad you were one of the bodies in that every." Back inside, passengers discovered they were characters. A cable news producer coaxed Row 9's old seat into a studio across town with a promise of dignity and 3 professional lights. She declined, then compromised. "Audio only, no makeup, 1 sentence." When they asked her what she saw, she said, "A woman who had done the work," and refused a second question. The executive had already given 4 interviews. In the first, he was righteous. In the second, measured. In the third, he tried to be contrite and looked like a man wearing someone else's suit. In the fourth, he cried because the comments had found his wife's account. The internet forgave the first and third interviews and crucified the second and fourth. It is not a court, it is weather. By evening, a handful of aviation forums, those stubborn bulletin boards where avatars outlive careers, weighed in with a precision mainstream coverage cannot afford. Half of them argued about pack controllers and recycled air, and the myth of masks always drop. The other half parsed the word advisor as if it were a sacred text. A handle named Ground Pounder 17 posted, without flourish or punctuation, "If your cap calls a person Night Viper, you strap in and do what she says." No one argued. Hughes called Cindy from the quiet of the crew bus bench. They spoke the way people speak after a funeral that didn't happen. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm carrying around the sound of that kid's hiccups like a relic," she said. "You?" He considered the runway again. "Like I borrowed luck from a future I haven't earned yet," he said. "We'll pay it back with training." "Or with better pack controllers," she said dryly. "Both," he said. Later, when the terminals had traded their day for a cleaner version of night, corporate communications came back with a new script. "We're going to celebrate our crew," they said. "We'll emphasize teamwork. We'll show faces. Captain, we'd love a short video." "Fine," Hughes said, "as long as you keep one face off it." "That's the idea," Com said. He recorded the video in a break room with a vending machine humming in the background and a poster about hydration awkwardly in frame. He spoke simply. The crew worked together. The system worked. Procedures mattered. He did not mention Night Viper. He did not need to. Half the comments were some version of, "Who's Row 9?" The other half were, "Thank you for your voice." Hughes deleted anything that attacked Cindy by name. Then he turned off his phone and put it in a drawer as if it might bite him. Trent went home to a tiny apartment with a plant that needed better promises. He watched the cabin video twice, then shut his laptop and lay on the floor because the couch felt too opinionated. Later, he wrote an email to himself with the subject line "Debrief," things we got lucky on, then added 20 bullet points and scheduled it to send to Hughes in the morning. He fell asleep with his hands open, as if the yolk still needed somewhere to go. The mother from Row 10 bathed her son, tucked him in, and found the toy plane on the bathroom counter where he'd left it to wash the sky off. She wiped a drop of water from the nose with the corner of a towel and placed it on the windowsill. When he asked for a story, she said, "Once there was a woman who listened to an airplane," and found herself crying on the second sentence, quietly, efficiently. Row 9's old seat made tea in a kitchen that had seen other midnights and mailed a short letter to a friend she had not called in years. "Today a stranger reminded me of our best sin," she wrote, "competence without spectacle." She sealed the envelope with a thumb and the satisfaction of getting the word right. Somewhere far from Port Larson, a faceless account with an empty bio posted a grainy photo of a girl in a flight suit on a tarmac under a gray mountain. The caption read, Oregon, night. The comments sprouted theories like mold, staged, AI, archive, myth. The account deleted itself an hour later. Screenshots multiplied like a rumor you can't smoke out. Near midnight, an email with a subject line that grinned, "We'd like to tell your story," hit Night Viper's inbox. It was from a production company with a charming logo and a link to a trailer for a documentary about unsung heroes. She deleted it, another followed, then two more. She put her phone on airplane mode and laughed without humor at the phrase. On a smaller screen in a quieter room, a late-night anchor with a reputation for decency showed the clip of the cabin hearing a stranger's voice and offered a simple line before cutting to commercial. Sometimes the person you ignored in row 9 is the one you were always going to need. The ad that followed sold insurance with a quivering dog and a jazz piano. By dawn, the airline issued a second statement. It was better. It thanked the crew by name and the passengers for their composure. It committed to reviewing systems. It did not claim that masks always drop. It did not mention Night Viper. The comments were kinder, not kind, kinder. Hughes forwarded the statement to Trent with a single sentence. "It'll do until training catches up." Trent replied, "Training starts today." He attached his bullet list. He added another line, "Thank you for letting her stay." Hughes typed back and deleted 3 different versions of "I couldn't have done it without her" before settling on the closest thing that wouldn't cost them jobs. We made the right choice. At Port Larson, the morning flights stacked like polite decisions on the departure board. The day prepared to move on in the way days always do. A ground crewman passing stand 14 found a folded napkin by the wheel chock, picked it up to toss it, then noticed a small hand-drawn runway sketched in pen and the words, "You have more room than you think." He put it in his pocket, not because he believed in omens, but because he had a wallet and it was empty of reminders. When Captain Hughes stepped onto the crew bus for the ride to a hotel that would smell like shampoo and someone else's shoes, he glanced across the tarmac as if a hoodie might appear from a corner of wind and sunlight. Nothing moved but the flags. He sat, hands folded, and for the first time allowed himself the indulgence of imagining what he would have said if she'd stayed. He settled on nothing. Silence did better work. Somewhere, the day the airline thought it had captured informs was out walking, unrecorded, ordinary as a street. It would stay that way until someone needed it again. That was the point. The ocean met the horizon like an old friend pretending not to stare. Night Viper stood at the edge of a bluff where wind came clean off the Pacific, carrying salt, gulls, and the quiet truth that no one could copyright the sky. Below her, waves wrote and erased names on wet sand over and over, the only paperwork that ever mattered. She hadn't slept since Port Larson. Sleep was for people whose bodies still believed they'd landed. Her mind kept replaying the descent in small, invisible edits. The moment the valve steadied, the breath the cabin took together, the way the runway lights had looked like punctuation marks saying enough. Her phone vibrated once in her jacket pocket. She ignored it. Then twice. She sighed, pulled it out, and saw the caller ID. Hughes. She let it ring almost to the end before answering. "Captain." He exhaled on the other end, a sound half made of laughter. "You don't answer. I start assuming you took off again." "I did," she said, "just not in a plane." "You saw the headlines?" "I don't read stories written by people who weren't there. They're writing you into everyone anyway. Mystery pilot, ghost aviator, myth. Some guy online said you were an AI in a hoodie." "Better PR than dead," she said. He chuckled softly. Company settled down. Trent got promoted to flight instructor. They're putting him in a classroom next month. "He'll do fine," she said. "He listens." Silence filled only by wind. "They're reviewing our report," he went on. "There'll be a hearing. You know how it goes. Procedure wants to remind us who's boss. They'll want a scapegoat. Give them weather. It never sues back. I could use you in the room," he said quietly, "if you wanted to stop being a ghost." "I stopped being a pilot," she said. "Didn't say I stopped being useful." "Fair enough." A pause. "You were right, by the way. Pack B was the culprit. Valve controller lied its teeth out. Maintenance found condensation in the pressure sensor, old damage from a seal replacement 3 years ago. Should have been caught. It usually should have, she murmured. You'll fix it in the next revision. Already drafting it. Another silence, not awkward, just full. Then he said, You ever think about coming back? She watched a gull wheel once and vanish into light. Sometimes, she admitted. Then I remember that every cockpit has a clock in it. I'm done measuring time by altitude. He didn't argue. He knew what that meant. You still have friends in ATC, he said. If you ever file a plan, somebody will clear it. Good to know. She almost ended the call, but he said, Night Viper? I never got to say thank you. You just did, she said, and disconnected. By dusk, she'd walked 5 miles down the coast road to a harbor town where the fishing boats slept tied 2 by 2. She bought coffee from a shack with a hand-painted sign that said, Open if it's warm enough to stand here, then sat on a bench watching an old Cessna drag its shadow across the water. The barista, a kid with sunburn and curiosity, nodded at her boots. You fly? Used to. Cargo. Stories, she said. He grinned. That pay. Only in exits. She left a tip big enough to be remembered, small enough not to raise questions, and walked toward the marina. The world felt tuned again. Planes overhead were just planes, not omens. People in the cafe behind her were laughing about something ordinary. Civilization at cruise altitude. At the end of the pier sat a rusted storage container with faded stencils. Pacific Coast Weather Survey. Decommissioned. The lock was broken. Inside was a chair, a coil of rope, and a radio older than most pilots. She turned one knob. Static filled the box like sand. She tuned it until the hiss smoothed into a steady heartbeat, HF frequency, military band, somewhere between forgotten and forgiven. She keyed the mic once. Night Viper 9, test, Static replied. She smiled. Some habits are prayers you whisper just to see if heaven still answers. 2 days later, in a meeting room 4 states away, Captain Hughes sat before a panel of safety auditors who spoke in bullet points. You deviated from company procedure, one said. I executed emergency discretion under 14-121, he replied. You allowed a non-crew member on the flight deck. I allowed the person who saved 200 lives to help me do it. They frowned in unison. Bureaucrats who didn't like arithmetic that didn't add up in policy columns. We can't verify her credentials, one said. She verified herself, Hughes said. The airplane stopped lying the moment she touched the panel. The head of the panel scribbled something on a form, then looked up. Where is she now? Hughes allowed himself the smallest smile. Flying lower, he said. That night, the report went through revisions until its teeth were dull. In the final version, her name appeared nowhere. Only a line in section C2, unidentified advisor, believed to possess former aviation experience, provided technical assistance resulting in safe outcome. It was enough. News cycles moved on. The internet grew a new obsession. The hashtag #Row9 softened into nostalgia before fading entirely. But in smaller corners, forums where airmen still traded checklists like poetry, stories persisted. Someone claimed to have seen her at a training hangar in Alaska, teaching pressure recovery on a simulator older than the students. Someone else swore she'd joined a maritime weather crew. One post included a photo, a figure in a gray hoodie standing beside a decommissioned fighter jet, hand on the wing root like an old promise. It was blurry enough to be anyone, which made it perfect. Hughes kept flying. Trent taught. Cindy transferred to safety operations. The airline quietly replaced every valve in its fleet. The passengers went home, told versions of the same story that all began differently but ended the same. And then the woman in row 9 stood up. Months later, a small envelope arrived at Hughes' house. No return address. Inside, a napkin, folded in half, with a hand-drawn map of the Port Larson coastline and a single line written beneath it. Every runway points somewhere. Don't forget to leave. He framed it above his desk. On nights when fog pressed against the windows, he would trace the lines with a fingertip and imagine a silhouette on a bluff, hair tangled in wind, waiting for nothing in particular. At the edge of that same bluff, as autumn leaned into winter, Night Viper stood once more. She'd borrowed a battered motorcycle from a mechanic who didn't ask for ID. The machine waited behind her, rumbling softly, patient as a heartbeat. She watched a jet climb through low clouds far out over the ocean. Its lights blinked twice before vanishing into silver. She raised a hand in the old salute. 2 fingers, palm in, the gesture pilots used to give each other across tarmacs too loud for words. Then she turned, pulled on her helmet, and swung onto the bike. The engine answered like an old friend saying, "Ready when you are." The road unwound ahead, thin and bright, disappearing into pine and distance. She didn't look back. The sky behind her remained clean, unclaimed, and honest. Somewhere far above, a voice on an HF frequency called out into static, "Night Viper 9, you still on this net?" The static crackled once like laughter carried on wind. And then, faint but certain, "Always."